Hey guys, welcome to the channel and welcome to our first ever painting tutorial. So we are, as a channel, branching out into the wonderful, weird world of painting and all the crazy skills and techniques that come with it.
Exciting time.
Because we've got this guy. So you may have seen the intro video we did a little while back, about a week or two ago, telling you that this was coming. And this is the first one we're going to film, and hopefully it will go well. It could be a car crash.
It could be an absolute.
We've not practiced anything. I don't know if it's going to work. I've not got the sort of setup that Warhammer TV have got up with their 14 cameras that pan back and forth to your face. So, but we'll try and avoid his face.
Yeah, that'd be great.
So we're bringing the first painting one, and we decided to do a simplish one.
Yeah, it's quite straightforward. Basically, a load of people that I spoke to have said, how do we do sort of, blending and all this sort of stuff. And the easiest way I think to show it or demonstrate that is on sort of cloth.
Yeah.
Because I mean, with cloth, you're looking at sort of soft transitions through colours. We'll discuss it as we're going through it, but yeah, I think it's quite a good demonstration. So the model choice is largely irrelevant, really. We've gone for the Deathwatch Captain because it will help me for my stuff. And
you benefit from it as well.
Any sort of chance I get to paint something Deathwatchy will help. But like I say, the model choice is largely irrelevant. It's mainly just about the technique and the application of the paint to the model. So yeah, don't worry too much about it being a space.
So we're pretty much using a loin cloth today. That's all it is, isn't it, really? But this can be applied to any cloth or material, hoods, cloaks, robes, etc., etc., etc. So for that, it can then be applied to any army, pretty much, because almost every army's got some sort of robe. You can use it on Stormcast guys. You can use it on Lord of the Rings. You can use it on anything. Yeah. And that's what we're going to try and do with most of these tutorials, is just to show you a technique and process that you can then apply to different models. Today, you're using red to blend.
Yes.
So we're going to do this soft transition blending on red, but obviously the technique again is transferable to any other colour. Yeah. If you're unsure of your colour choice, you can drop into Patreon, come and join us in Discord. There are Martin channels in Discord, and you could say, I like the blending you did on the cloth. I want to do it in green. Yeah. What are the 6 colours or 5 colours you'd use for green? And they'll be able to give you those recipes. So check out Patreon below, come and join us in there. We're now going to get set up as a let's show you painting studio. I have no idea how this is going to work. So you're learning with us, yay! And we'll jump straight in with a model, and then what I'll probably do is stand behind the camera and pan back and forth to pretty face and pretty model and ask you questions as we go. And we'll do kind of a Duncan-esque where we'll show you the start of the process and how it's working, and then I won't show you the whole video because you'll be here for hours.
And literally watching paint dry, which is quite dull.
We'll skip the watching paint dry bit, although it's content, I suppose, at least. Well, and then we'll come back when it comes to the next stage and the next stage, and we'll try and show you the detail in the stages so you guys can copy along and follow along. Be aware that if you are copying along, it will take a bit longer because you need to watch paint dry. And unlike normal, I know when you're at home, you have a nice little hairdryer.
Yeah, hairdryer. Because I don't use it for my actual hair.
So we don't have that here, so we'll be gassing, and that'll probably dry out. Anyway, let's go and have a look at the model and the paints he's using.
Okay guys, so today we're going to talk about, like I said, layering and blending highlights on cloth. Okay, so cloth is quite a natural texture to paint, whereas sort of your more harder surfaces such like power armor, steel armor, all that sort of thing, the edge highlight's very sort of sharp, whereas the texture of cloth, it means that the light will be diffused across it. So what we're looking for is a really soft blended highlight, so you don't need to be too stark. A lot of people, myself included when we first started, get involved a bit too stark, so you end up jumping from one to another and it doesn't look natural. So what you need to do sometimes is rein that back, and I've learned that over the years, is that sometimes less is more. So nice diffused highlight across some cloth is what we're going to be working on today. So just to go through some bits and bobs that I'm using today, I'm going to use a wet palette. We'll probably do a video on wet palettes and what they are, why they're used, etc. Essentially just keeps your paint alive for a bit longer. Sometimes you're sort of working against the clock before your paint dries on your palette, so wet palette will just allow that to keep going a bit longer. Also, the colours that I'm going to be using today, I'm going to paint it as red, but like we said earlier, you can use it as any colour you want. The technique remains the same. So I'm going to start off with a base coat of a nice bright vibrant red. Okay, so we start quite bright with Mephiston red, and then we're going to shade that down with some corn red, corn mixed with a tiny bit of black, and then we'll work up some highlights back through Mephiston to establish that base coat, through to Evilsun Scarlet, Wild Rider red, and then we're going to start adding some Ungor flesh and some Bloodletter glaze to the mix as well. So we'll go through the colours We'll explain the techniques that we're going through, and we'll go from there. Okay, so the first thing, we've done some model prep. I've sub-assembled it as best I can, so I've left the head off and also the bolt gun arm, which went across the loincloth. So to make life easier for myself, I just left that arm off, which gives me lots of access to this front loincloth here. Just having a look, use the lighting in the room that you've got, or your desk lamp, just to have a look at where the curves are, and you'll see that the light will naturally attract to those edges. So that's what you want to try and replicate. So again, just have a look, and you're looking at this fold here, just on the edge, the outer edge of this one here, again in the center of this one, and then the outer edge of this fold. And then as you get to the top, you'll notice that the creases have come a lot sharper and a lot thinner. Again, it's just a bit more of a detail work to get into those little crevices. But yeah, so the first colour we're going to use is Mephiston Red. It's a Citadel base paint, so it's designed for base coating. It's going to take, red over black's never easy, so I think it's going to take a number of coats, not too thin coats or any of that sort of stuff. So I'm not going to go down that road, but make those tired old jokes. But all we're going to do is just start adding that base coat on. Don't have to be particularly neat at this stage, although it does help. But we just need to make sure that we're getting a good solid coat of the base colour on there. A handy hint as well is always attack the wet edge. So you'll see here is where I've finished painting. What you don't want to do is leave that to dry, because what you'll find is that will dry and then you'll add another one and it will start to look like a small ridge where the paint's going onto the model. So you always want to be attacking the wet edge and just make sure that you're getting a good solid coat over all of the loincloth. Looks very bright at this stage, which will obviously change. We'll up the contrast by adding some different glazes and shades to it and highlights. So yeah, just another top tip, just make sure that the first coat is completely dry before you go into the second one. A lot of the time what you see people doing is get impatient and they'll start adding more paint over the top when it's half dry, and that's when you get the sort of the paint lifting from the first coat, and then you'll end up with sort of like a dark, like a circle colour, sort of darker patch, which is obviously not the effect that you're looking for. Okay, cool. So it's taken maybe 3 or 4 coats, but we've now got a nice solid colour from Mephiston Red. Like I say, some colours are going to cover, in sort of less coats, some in more. But yeah, Mephiston Red, 3 or 4, you've got a good solid colour, and it's important. This is probably the most important stage, ensuring you've got a good, nice, consistent, even, solid colour throughout the whole thing. So even down to the recesses and the folds, it's important that you get everything with a nice, even coverage. So what we're going to move on to now is actually adding some shade to our loincloth. So again, sort of having a look at the light, you're going to have the recess running along here, a very deep one in here, a bit of a shallower one along this edge, and then you can have some really sharp creases at the top. So what we're going to do first is we're going to do what's known as a soft shade, and this will sort of just start accentuating the features of the model. So for this we're going to use Corn Red, and we're going to thin that down with some Lahmian Medium. You can use water if you want. It doesn't make too much of a difference. It just depends on what your preference is. So for this example, we're just going to use Lahmian Medium, and you'll notice that the first soft shade really won't make that much of a difference, but for the final product, that's where it really starts paying its dividends. So really sort of subtle effect to begin with. It's easier to, or it's much better to sort of start off quite subtle and then build it up, rather than just go too much, because then it's a lot harder to take it back. So what I've done, I've thinned down some Corn Red with the Lahmian Medium on my palette. Just going to load up my brush, and all I'm going to do is just run this colour into the recessed areas. Don't have to worry about being too neat. And also Penitentiary's got his lantern ornament on the front of his loincloth. Just making sure that you surround that item with that shade as well. Like I said, because of the of how thin the shade actually is, you don't have to be super neat. Don't worry, you know, if you start putting it in places that you don't really want to be at this stage. It's not a huge drama, but just make sure you've got all those folds and creases covered with this initial soft shade. I'm going to build it back up again shortly. So that's the first coat done. We'll leave that to dry, and then we'll tackle it again once it's dry. Okay, so as we see now, the first coat of the initial shade is dry, and there isn't a great deal of difference. If you look carefully, you can just about start seeing it getting a bit darker in those recesses. But like I say, going in soft here, it will pay you dividends later on, because what you want is a nice soft blended transition out into these further reaches up here. So starting off really soft will pay dividends later on. So what we're going to do now is essentially do the same thing again. So we're going to add yet another coat, and the reason we're going to do this is because it comes down to the way paint works. So because we put such a thin coat of the corn red on, if we then add another coat of that thin corn red into those same recesses, that's going to strengthen that colour up. And what we're going to do is the same way we do highlighting, it gets progressively smaller. With shading, it's exactly the same. So we just progressively work into a smaller part of the recess, and that was where the strongest part of the colour will be. So that's where it's going to be the darkest. So we'll do that now. Again, just load up the brush with some of the corn red. We're going to be a bit more prescriptive this time. So we're not going to be quite as haphazard. We're just going to work on enhancing that corn red, and again accentuating the shape of this canister in the middle of the cloth there, and again just looking for the deepest recesses. So for example, this one here near the top is very deep, especially just below his belt buckle there, so that's going to be one we're going to have to concentrate on. We're just going to look at trying to get that corn red into the deepest depths. If we have what we have here just now, so we've gone on to the actual fold here, what we can do is we can start to feather that out. So I've just taken the shade off of my brush. I'm a bit of a brush licker, so if you know, if you do start making a mistake, or you know you've gone a bit too far, then just take some of the shade off of your brush, and you can just start feathering it away. So with a bit of saliva, just feathering that shade out towards the edge, and that is where the sort of the key for the blending comes in. It's very it's very sort of hit and miss. So sometimes, you know, you'll apply it again, lick the brush off, and just use that saliva to wipe that away, and you'll get a really smooth transition. So I'll go round and apply the second coat of the corn red into the recesses, and then we'll come back once it's all dry. Okay, so now that's all dry, we've got two coats of that thinned corn red, which is starting to accentuate those shapes and give us that soft transition across the folds. What we're going to do now is we're going to try and accentuate those a bit further and mark out those different shapes, particularly around this one on the left hand side, which is the wraparound essentially from the rear. So we're going to try and accentuate that shape and also really push the contrast into the deeper recesses. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the corn red that we used before and just add a dot of black. I'll use Army Painter matte black. I'll just get on with it a bit better than the GW black. So I've just added a dot of that in, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to run a thin line into the deepest recesses, to, like I say, really try and accentuate those shapes. So the colour we've got with the black and the corn red is a it looks like a sort of a really deep purple colour. So like I say, what we're doing is we're going to be really careful to try and keep this to the deepest recess and keep it quite thin. So whereas before with the thin corn red, we could be a bit messy with it. What we're going to try and do with this colour is really try and be a bit more focused and precise with it. And what we're going to do is avoid the you know, the sort of the lighter recesses. So we really just want to concentrate on those darkest bits, because what will happen is when we start adding the highlights, the contrast will then be well off. If you go too dark with your shading, you'll find that once you start adding the contrast, the highlights, the contrast will change. So these recesses will look darker, even though we haven't changed the colour. So it's important that you don't go too far with the shading. So if you go to almost sort of pure black, then it's hard to recover it, and it will start to look unnatural. So like I said, we're trying to get that smooth cloth appearance rather than a more sort of solid, you know, sort of solid object, solid metal, solid plastic. So what we want to do, like I said, we're going to get that soft transition. So we're just going to try and show you how to feather out this shading. So again, it's the same technique whether you're shading up or highlighting up or shading down. So in this recess here, like I said, it's quite sharp. So what we're going to do is just run that shade colour in, quickly wash your brush off, and then we're just going to, you can use either water or, like I say, just lick your brush, use a bit of saliva. You can just feather that colour out. So you're getting that smooth blend between the really darkest crease there, and then it's going to be slightly getting lighter as it comes out onto this the main flat area. And then you can build that up. So you can just do the same thing again. So run the colour into the recess, quick lick of the brush, and then just quickly feather it out. And it just gives you that smooth transition. And then when that dries, hopefully it will give you a seamless transition from the deepest recess in there, the really dark colour, all the way back out onto the Mephiston red. Okay, cool. Now, so as you can see, we've really pushed the depth and the contrast. So we've pushed that corn and black mix into the deepest recesses, and then started accentuating those shapes. So especially, like I say, this wraparound here, that's one that we want to try and concentrate on, and also this really deep recess in the middle. You'll notice that the one on the edge here is a lot of a shallower recess, whereas this one is a lot darker. So we've pushed more of the colour into that. Again, more coats, building up that sort of that opacity will help with that. So what we're going to do now is we're going to start re-establishing that mid-tone. So that Mephiston red that we used as a base coat, we're going to try and re-establish some of that, because the corn red, like I said, we were quite haphazard when we were putting that soft shade on. So what we need to do now is to sort of blend that Mephiston red back onto that mid-tone to re-establish that, and that will give us the basis that we need to start working on the highlights. So once we've done that, we can have a look at where the highlights and the shading is, and then we can just work out whether or not we want to push the shading back a bit further, or maybe sort of move the highlights a bit higher. So like I say, don't go too far on the shading early doors. Make sure you get to a point later on, once you've added some highlights, and you can really start having a look and say, okay, well, I need to push that further. Like I say, it's easier to be able to push it further rather than trying to bring it back once you get too far. So what I've done, I've thinned down some Mephiston red, just with a little touch of lime in medium, just so it's quite a thin mix. And then we're just going to start looking at pushing that mix onto the highest points of these ridges. So we'll do that. Now what I've done, I've brought along a piece of kitchen roll, and what I'm going to do, I'm going to load the brush up and then just wipe the brush on the kitchen roll slightly, and then look to just use push strokes to the edges of the folds. You'll notice when you paint, sometimes when you lift the brush up off the miniature, a little pool appears, a little puddle. That's somewhat unavoidable. You can't really get rid of that, but what we're looking to do is use that to our advantage. So we're going to leave that puddle at the highest point of our miniature. So if you left it at the bottom part, obviously it's going to look unnatural because it's going to be right next to the shading. So with this wraparound, what we're going to do is pretty much just re-establish all of that Mephiston red and really start bringing it up, and then we'll feather it out as it gets towards the top here. And again, once it's dry, you just start adding it again. Again, just pushing it to that furthest edge. And what you'll notice, the more you build it up and the further you push it towards the edge, you'll get a smooth transition from where the shading is to where the lightest part of that model is there. So we'll keep working our way round, and then we'll come back once it's all done. Okay, so we've started re-establishing that base colour with the Mephiston red and started building up those folds. What we're going to do now is start moving into the actual highlights of the cloth itself. So what we're going to do, we're going to move from Mephiston red into Evil Sunz Scarlet, which is quite a bright, vibrant red. So it's, you need to be careful with how you're sort of doing this. If you put too much, you know, quite a bright, sort of too vibrant for what you're looking at. Obviously with these Space Marines, they're meant to be, sort of elite tactical kind of guys, and the way I've got them, I've got pouches all over them, so I don't want it to be too much, but at the same time I want it to be, stand out and be quite a focal point of the miniature, because this is the HQ choice. So what we're going to do, we'll thin down some Evil Sunz Scarlet, again with a little bit of Lahmian Medium, and again it's the same process as before. When we re-establish the base coat, what we're going to do is we're going to get the Evil Sunz Scarlet and just start pushing it towards the edges of the folds. So along there, that's probably one of the main ones. Once you start getting to the highlighting stage, you can start working out where your focal points are going to be. So for me on this one, again, we've got that wraparound that we spoke about earlier. This fold here, that sort of inverted L shape. We've also got the thin one here, and also just below his belt buckle, there's a sort of a triangular shape, which we're going to work on as well. So yeah, we'll try and add some highlights to that. Again, it's the same process as before. Just load the brush up, take some of it off, so there's not a great deal on the brush itself. And then what we're going to do is just, like I say, push that colour to the edge. Now you'll notice that with this one, or certainly with that application there, it was extremely bright just on the edge. So what I've done, I've taken the paint off again with my mouth and just sort of feathered it in slightly. So what I'm going to do, that tells me that I need to thin this paint down ever so slightly, just a bit more. So I'm going to add some more Lahmian Medium to the mix. Okay, so I've added some more Lahmian Medium to the Evil Sunz Scarlet, and what you'll notice is it's extremely thin on the palette. It's almost sort of shade consistency or wash consistency. And this will really start to tell when we apply it to the kitchen roll. You'll see that capillary action, it will just start spreading. That's when we know it's a good sort of consistency for this sort of technique. And what we're going to do is we're just going to apply it again, like I say, feather it onto that corner, following that crease along and really accentuating that inverted L shape. Similar for the wraparound. Again, that one's pretty much going to be all Evil Sunz Scarlet faded out towards the top. So again, apply the paint on, and then once you're happy, paint off and just feather that wet edge away to give you a nice smooth transition as you're going up the cloth itself. So again, apply the paint to the brush, dab it all off on a bit of kitchen roll so you haven't got too much, and then just start applying it again. Just feather it on to the areas that you want to work on.
Now you've shown me this stage before on a different model.
Yeah.
I remember when it went on, when I did it myself, it's almost like a watery consistency, isn't it? Almost,
Yeah,
it's almost see-through.
Yeah, it's very transparent, which is what you need really for, I mean, this is essentially what we're doing is glazing the highlights on. When it's sort of like a reverse of dry brushing really, you sort of putting a really thin paint onto your brush and then getting rid of the majority onto the kitchen roll. So it's sort of like dry brushing in that regard, in that there's very little pigment on your brush, and all you're doing is just, sort of glazing that area, and you just build that up over time. I mean, this is for a gaming miniature, but at the same time, this is sort of, one of my captains. So, you want to do, you want some nice sort of quality paintwork on him, but at the same time I don't want to sort of spend too long, so you've got to weigh up sort of what's best for you with regards to sort of time scales. But yeah, you sort of see, just sort of feathering that in, paint's off, and then
so
just using the saliva to
as I'm trying to show you guys now on his palette, the red that he's using is very watered down here, so it's not like your normal traditional Duncan too thin coats. This is really, really thin stuff, and even as thin as it is, you then take the excess off on that piece of tissue paper. So when it goes onto the model, when I first tried it, I thought I was doing something wrong because it was so thin that it goes on looking like you're sort of painting water over the top of it, I guess. Very transparent, and as you do the more, you let it dry, and you bring the sort of surface area you're covering in, you then start to realise that the colour is climbing. It's such a gradual, transparent change that sometimes you can think it's not doing anything.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the more confident you get, the thicker you can allow the paint to be. So you can sort of just apply the paint and then try and blend it out with with a bit of water or whatever with a clean brush. So yeah, it depends on how confident you are with the technique and sort of how much effort you want to put into it.
Right, we'll let him crack on with the Evil Sunz colour.
Yeah.
And we'll come right back.
Okay, cool. So now you can see that red's really starting to get really vibrant and really get a bit more punchy. So what we're going to do now is we're going to start accentuating the high points of the folds. So we've done those soft transitions, and we're now looking to sort of really accentuate those the sort of the higher points and sort of break up those shapes a little bit. So what I'm going to do now, I'm just going to get some Wild Rider Red, which is quite a sort of an orangey, sort of like an orangey peachy colour. And what I'm going to do is start working out where the high points are. I'm going to start initially with a really thin coat, so pretty much as we were doing before with that glazed technique, feathering it out. So we'll start with that, and then what we'll do is we'll go to a bit of a thicker consistency, and then we'll start working out where the high points are and really concentrate on the edge. It's almost sort of like edge highlighting onto those folds. So if we start with the thinned Wild Rider, so again, get it onto your brush, get most of it off with a kitchen roll, and again, so this inverted L shape that we've been working on, again just pushing it to the edges, making sure that we're leaving some of that Evil Sunz scarlet behind. And again, very precise sort of precision highlights now. So we're going to really tighten up our work, so we can't be as sort of haphazard as we have been. So we're really looking at being spot on with what we're looking at. So for example, this ridge here, starting really, really soft as you're coming up, and then concentrating more just at this high point. And we'll run a highlight from the top down to the bottom shortly once that's dry. We'll leave that a couple of seconds. And again, this edge here, again what we want to do is try and really accentuate the shape of the cloth. That's the whole point of the edge highlights. So you speak to Heavy Metal, and the reason they do edge highlights on absolutely everything is to show each part of the miniature and show it all off, so everything is visible, because obviously they're trying to sell models. They want to be able to sort of show off all the sculpted details. So that's again the reason why I will sort of show off the shape of the loincloth by just sort of edge highlighting around the edges. Not terribly realistic, but rule of cool prevails. So all we're going to do is just use the edge of our brush at a 45-degree angle and just work our way around it. Just have that sharp, again another inverted L shape against the black of the armour, and that will really stand out, and we'll do a bit more on that shortly. So yeah, we're just working around, again another soft transition, and then once that's done we'll really tighten up with the thicker Wild Rider red, and add those sort of striped highlights that you see on sort of box art and things like that. So again, below the belt buckle here, again a nice soft sort of feathered transition towards the edge. Still on the fold over, we're just going to attack that edge there. And then you'll notice that when you start applying these lighter highlights, that the shading, the initial shading that we did, starts to look a lot darker. So the contrast between the edge of that fold over there and then the shading exactly sort of, you know, next to it there, the contrast is a lot more. You know, the lighter you go, the darker that will appear. Even though you've not changed the colour, it will still appear a lot darker. So I mean, at points there it sort of looks almost black, which is why it's important what you talked about at the start when we're adding the shading, not to go too far, because when you start adding the highlights, the shading will look darker naturally to the eye. It's sort of a trick of the eye. But like I said, that's why it's important to really make sure that you're spot on with the shading early doors, and don't go too much, because you don't want too much of a contrast, because it will start to look unnatural, which is part of the problems I had with some of my painting. You know, sort of, you know, when I was learning, you know, I'd do too much shading, and it'd all be the same. You know, everything would be really high contrast. You know, sort of, it'd just be too much. So which works on some materials, you know, sort of armour and weapons and, you know, sort of man-made sort of material, hard solid materials. But when you start doing that sort of thing on skin and cloth, you know, it just doesn't look realistic, which is something that I've had to sort of work on over time. So we'll continue going around with the Wild Rider red and start building it up. This big area here, this sort of flat area, it kind of curves into where the canister's holding. So we'll do some of the soft highlights there just to try and accentuate that drop into the canister and make that stand out. Otherwise, you can go too far and you'll end up with sort of a bright orange loincloth rather than a red one. So yeah, we'll come back once those are all sorted out. Okay, so we've added the Wild Rider red. What I want to do is just add a bit of texture to the cloth. At the minute, it's looking very sort of orange and very vibrant, which will knock back later. So don't worry too much about that. You can always sort of knock back stuff with your initial mid-tone. So if you do go too stark, I think some of the orange towards the bottom especially is maybe a bit much. So don't worry too much about that. If you get to that point, you can always knock that back, which we'll show you shortly. But what I want to do is add just a little bit of texture to some of these folds. And what you see on a lot of cloth is sort of, you know, that sort of Hessian kind of look. So what we're going to do is just get some of this Wild Rider red that we've been using and just add tiny faint lines coming off of that top highlight. They're going to disappear as I go down, so literally it's just going to be sort of just really thin lines just to accentuate that highlight and just to give it a bit more of the appearance of that cloth. So where the light's hitting it, it's hitting those individual fibres. So again, what we'll need to do is have the Wild Rider Red, again, thicker than what we have been using. And literally all we're going to do is just really faint, thin lines coming off of that central highlight. You won't be able to see them from anything over than 12 inches, like I'm struggling to see them now, whereas if you get in close, you can see them and it will really give you that something extra and something special. Whether the camera's picking it up or not, I don't know, but we'll try and get some still photos towards the end once everything's done. Hopefully you'll be able to see exactly what it is I'm doing. So again, you know, just trying to build it up, build up those tiny lines. Just go for a few different passes, because obviously, you know, you're doing something that, you know, is 28mm or 32mm scale. It's going to be hard for the eye to pick up. So, you know, that's why it's important to really be super careful with these and just make it as faint as you possibly can and small as you possibly can. Takes a bit of practice.
As Martin said, so obviously I'm still behind the camera here filming it, as I said I would do, and asking him a question so far. But I don't know. We're filming in full HD, so we're filming 1080p. I think it's 60 frames per second. So we're filming in quite a high resolution, and I'm not sure, looking through my view screen, if we're picking up the detail that he's putting on here. Having gone and looked at the model close up, detail's already great. So we are going to get some still photos of this, hopefully. And towards the end of the video, or at the end of the video, we will show some stills of the model, so that anything you don't catch on camera, you'll probably be able to see it, hopefully, in the pictures anyway. But what this is good is it's good for at least showing you the methods that he does, the way in which it's built up from shade, up through mid-tone, up to the highlights, adding the detail, adding the sort of texture. And there's more highlights to come. So at least you'll see the method and the colours that are being used, etc. And then at the end, you'll see the end result, where it goes from this dark, what was originally corn red with a touch of black, but now looks even darker, all the way up through Wild Rider, Evil Sunz, all the way up to the highest highlight. So don't worry if you can't see it. We're going to still try and show you at the end. Like we said to you at the start, this is a learning exercise for both of us. Me trying to film this and soon edit it, and him painting for the camera. Like now, when all you can see is the bottom of his base.
Sols.
Don't worry, mate. So we'll let him carry on with this Wild Rider, and we'll come right back.
Yeah, so what I'm going to do now, I'm just going to really work on finishing that really tight, fine highlight on the edge of the cloth and the edge of those ridges. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to mix some Ungor flesh in with some of the Wild Rider Red. You can go straight to Ungor if you're feeling brave. Being as this is the first time I've done it on camera and holding miniatures slightly differently, I'm going to do it as a 50-50 step, just to give myself a bit of a safety net. But yeah, just add a bit of water. You'll notice that, you know, you've got sort of how thin these colours have been on the palette. You know, sort of it's that thin that it's even started to dry on the wet palette. So, you know, you've got blobs of pure paint which are still, you know, workable, but this was so thin that it's starting to dry out. So yeah, we'll get a nice tip on the brush, and then we'll apply it to the miniature on that highest edge. So this one, for example, again, you want to leave some of that pure Wild Rider, leave that behind, and then literally it's just a single line along the top of that ridge. And this this main focal point here, again, you're going to be hitting that bottom point here, so, you know, make that quite wide, and then when you make it sort of tighter, so you want to sort of it's almost like a light bloom at the bottom there, with a thin line coming off that, because we're then going to add a further highlight to that bottom part there. And then again with this one here, we're just going to really accentuate that shape, and this will really make that contrast pop between the highest highlights and the shading. Again, I appreciate this is quite garish at the minute, but we have a cure for that coming up shortly.
So for some of you, those angles that he does, so like right now you can see it really clearly, and some of the other angles you can see the base hiding the model. One thing you'll notice when he's painting is that, and I'm sure most people do this anyway, but it's important to note, because watching people like Duncan on Warhammer TV, you wouldn't necessarily believe it, but getting a comfortable position is also really key when you're doing the accurate stages. Something you taught me ages ago. Making sure that that position, so right now, although we can't see it on camera, because he is painting this for his no retreat army, it's really important that he's at a comfortable place with both of his hands, because then they say, oh, you don't get the shake, you're more likely to be accurate, and you're going to get the paint where you want it, rather than where you don't.
Yeah, definitely. And the main thing as well, I mean, you know, you talk about people getting the shakes and stuff, you know, drinking water is probably massively key. Make sure, you know, you're well hydrated before you start painting, because you know, I found that if I start painting when I'm dehydrated, you know, whether it's, you know, a tough day at work or, you know, sort of after a night out or whatever, you know, if you start trying to paint when you're dehydrated, your hands will be all over the place. So, yeah, make sure, you know, you've got, you know, a bottle of water with you or whatever. Other refreshing beverages are available. What I'm doing with this 50/50 colour, I'm just going to start going into those really faint lines again, those texture lines, and again just make them a bit brighter as we're going towards that top edge of the fold. So again, you know, you're highlighting tiny little thin lines, which will give the impression of texture. Again, don't worry too much about it being a bit bright and a bit garish. It's probably made worse by the lighting, because it's very bright. So it probably looks even more garish on camera. But don't worry too much about that. Like I say, we can knock that back shortly with a bit of the mid-tone. But like I say, I'm just going in to quickly add some more of those little texture lines. Just to really accentuate that material. One more to do. Just this edge here. And then that's that step done. These last steps are really quick. Literally take you a couple of minutes for each one. So you know, that's why. So the importance is at the start, where you're getting the you know, a smooth base coat down, a strong solid base coat, and your initial sort of shading steps. They're the ones that are going to take the time, but it's important that you get those right. So yeah, what we'll do now, we'll move on to a pure Ungor flesh final highlight onto the real top edges, and this needs to be really fine and really tight. So yeah, sort of, you know, give yourself a bit of a break, go for a quick walk or whatever. And then just sort of get yourself ready, because obviously this is going to make the final effect. There are a couple of small steps afterwards, but obviously this is going to be the major one. So just make sure the paint's nice and workable, and that you haven't got too much on your brush. That's probably key for these fine steps right at the end. And then what we're going to do again is just follow that highlight line. Not too far up. Because you just want that to be accentuated towards the bottom.
Just the tip.
Just the tip, as she says. And again, just the corner of here, so we're really accentuating that shape against the background of the black armour. And again with the fold over, just on that corner there. Okay, so because that is quite garish by anybody's standards, what we're going to do now is going to start knocking that back, and I'm sure it looks even more garish on camera. So what we're going to do is start knocking that back, and we can do that by glazing. There's different ways of doing it. The easiest way I find for sort of gaming stuff, and what we'll try to do first, is just use one of the sort of dedicated glazes, such as the GW Bloodletter glaze for red. These are really punchy, powerful colours, so they need to be thinned down to make them sort of work for you. And again, it's easier to add more than try and take some away. So you can try and use it neat if you wanted to, but I'd rather do 2 sort of weaker coats of the Bloodletter rather than try and sort of do, you know, one full coat, because you can't take it away once it's on. So just going to add a tiny bit of the glaze to the palette. And then with this, I'll add some of the Lahmian medium. It's already got a bit of water, so I've hijacked a water drop on the palette. So we'll try and thin this down somewhat. And what we're aiming to do, we'll get a larger brush, which means there'll be less brush strokes. Okay, and with this then we're going to load our brush up with the glaze. And again, we're going to do as we did before, we're just going to wipe the majority off onto a piece of kitchen towel, and then we're just going to go over the whole area that we've worked into the recesses. And it's not a wash as such, because there shouldn't be enough on your brush for it to act as a wash. It literally is, you're just painting a very, very thin coat of this semi-transparent colour all over what you've done. And what you find, the same as I've been doing before, you know, the more you add, the stronger that red will return, because at the bottom obviously we had quite a considerable amount of orange and the Ungor flesh. So we'll have a look at that. We'll let that dry, see how that looks, and then we'll maybe try and do another couple of coats just to really bring that punch of the red back and re-establish that mid-tone. Okay, cool. So we've added a couple of coats of that Bloodletter, and hopefully you'll be able to see on the camera, certainly to the eye, it's toned that contrast down significantly. So it was quite harsh, whereas now it's a lot more refined and a lot smoother. So those glazes will help sort of, you know, and it'll assist with the blends as well. So, you know, if you've got a bit of a patchy area or a patchy blend, you know, you can add some more of that glaze around those areas to try and sort of disguise the transitions some more. So the final thing we're going to do, sometimes known as constellation highlights or dot highlights, is that the final piece de resistance for a model, you know, is a sort of the final dot highlight. So for example, on this one then, we've got the point where that folds over. So we've got the point there, the point there, point there, and a point there. So we're just going to add a single dot highlight of Ungor flesh onto those. That's our highest point. So we're just going to do that. Once we've done that, we'll then repaint the canister black, which hopefully will make everything look a bit neater and sort my OCD out, because at the minute I'm getting upset because it's half red, half black. And then we'll come back to it for the final product. Okay, so those final dots of the pure Ungor flesh added to the highest points, that's us pretty much done. So I've done the black canister, reinforced all those black outline on there. So yeah, that's pretty much it. So if you remember anything from this, just obviously make sure, like I say, you start off the shading quite soft, because it will reward you in the end with that soft transition. And just remember, you know, if you do go too garish, like I did today, totally on purpose, definitely, just make sure that you can glaze that back, either with, like I say, with some of the red glaze, or you can thin your initial sort of base colour, your mid-tone, into a glaze. So use some of your Lahmian medium or even water, just to thin that, in our case Mephiston red, thin that down, and you can glaze that over in the same sort of way that you did with the Bloodletter. So what we'll do, we'll try and get some good photos, because obviously, you know, it's quite difficult to sort of see all the ins and outs, especially the texture to the cloth. So we'll try and get some good quality close-ups, so you can really see what's going on, which is obviously going to be a bit more sort of forgiving than these huge great lights above my head. So, but yeah, hope that helps you. Any questions, by all means, just add them in the chat, and I'll try and answer them as best I can. But obviously, we'll move on to other techniques. If you've got any questions or any requests, like Liam said in the intro video, please do just put a comment. We'll try and work our way through them as best we can. But yeah, thanks very much.
Right, as promised, we've got some images up for you now of this model. I'm hoping they came out as well on camera. I won't know until we're in post-edit. We're obviously recording this live now whilst looking at this model. Martin's already said it. You got questions, drop them in the comments below. Feel free to ask as many as you can or want, and I'm sure he'll try and get back to you. I'll try and help as well, but I don't paint to the same level that he does. So I can't promise that I'll be much use to you. Alternatively, rather than just dropping in the comments below, we mentioned it on the intro video ages ago, and we mentioned it on the intro to this video. We have a Patreon, and he is active in Patreon. In the Discord chat, there are specific Martin Waller painting channels. We've even given them your name,
I know.
just for speciality, so people know where to go if they want to ask someone who knows what he's talking about. So you can join Patreon, you can get access to those channels. He also put step-by-step guides in there, which are photos with written, so that's a bit more sort of, well, it has a bit more sort of longevity for you to sort of download the photos and store the text and stuff if you wanted to keep them as your own sort of personal guides and stuff. So they're in there. There's a higher level access as well, which we're going to start adding some stuff to in the future. We're also going to use Discord, I think, and release videos to the highest level Patreons of more sort of competition style painting, so a little bit more in depth than what you've just seen, because believe it or not, this that we're showing you right now is Martin's tabletop. So yeah, feel free to jump into Discord by joining us on Patreon, and you'll be more than welcomed by all the guys in our community. A big thank you and a big shout out to all of our patrons so far. We've got many and they're all awesome, so thank you guys for supporting the channel and helping us both do this, because you're now supporting Martin as well. And a big thank you to our sponsor Element Games. Element provided us with the Artis Opus brushes you've seen in the video, amongst other things that they supply us with, because they're an epic sponsor, so check them out in the video link below. Thank you very much. Yeah, give us a shout out, and for the patrons, if you're watching, jump into Discord and give us some sort of suggestions or some requests as to what you think you'd like to see us paint in the next few videos as we sit down with our calendars soon and plan the next one. And we'll see you in the next one.
Take care.